Welcome to the Great Shrimp Shoal. Today we'll be checking in on the new 10-gallon tank to see how the shrimp and plants have been getting on. Please make sure to like and subscribe and turn on notifications because my shrimp would love to add you to their collection. So last week, we ended on the note of me adding a few new members to this brand new tank without notifying you guys first, and for that I feel a little bit guilty. In my defense, I was tripling the tank's capacity overnight, and I would be removing the neon tetras eventually, so I felt as though I could add a few new members to this shrimpy community without tipping the scales too far into chaos. These planted tanks, especially if they are to survive for a long time, are all about balance, and I know I've mentioned that before, but it is an important point to continue to make. You'll see a lot of breeders do so in bare-bottom tanks, and they do that for both fish and for shrimp, but they also don't do it with any decoration, substrate, or live plants, and I feel as though that's far more important to the happiness of the tank's inhabitants in an aquarium than most people would like to believe. And in the end, a breeder is doing it all for one reason, and that's to churn out as many fry and small fish as possible. Now, I believe that I have cycled this tank enough, and apart from the death when I introduced the shrimp last week, I think that it is ready to support as many shrimp as it is right now without any issues. With the copepods and what I've observed in the detritus worms, I think there's enough diversity for the full nitrogen cycle to exist, even with just the 2 sponge filters, which should limit my need for water changes to a normal amount. Primarily, I've been concerned with pH, at least that's what I've thought to be concerned with. We'll see how water hardness and other things are affected by the size of the tank and the frequency of the water changes. As you can see, I've decided to keep the lantern. Who knows for how long? And here, you can see one of my primary reasons for even getting the 10-gallon tank. To get that much closer to the inhabitants and get you much better shots of their beautiful coloring. The ghost shrimp really does eat pretty much everything. I've seen him stuck to plants for hours at a time, eating who knows what, and he's also seen here foraging for stuff at the bottom of the tank. The plant seen here is the newly added Utilitaria graminifolia, and it's a carnivorous plant that has grass-like structures. Unfortunately, its life cycle dictates that it requires a nitrogen in greater amounts than is in the current nitrogen cycle in the water column. As a carnivorous plant, it gets this nitrogen by eating crustaceans, mostly copepods and other smaller microscopic animals. Smaller and smaller amounts of the graminifolia are surviving week after week, and it either may be due to the fact that there isn't enough for them to eat and keep up their nitrogen cycle, or they just might be unaccustomed to the pH level in the water. Some of them have actually looked like they melted, so it could be the acidity. Let's talk about the setup of this new tank real quick, because it differs quite a bit from the garden and the way that it was set up. I did this for a couple of different reasons, and primarily it was to rectify some of the problems that I had encountered with the garden, but also to test out a couple of new solutions. The first thing to note is the substrate. I'm using 2 this time around, and that actually might be a bit of a problem, because I still won't be able to vacuum like I wanted to in the garden. This time I've used Carib Sea river sand, and I really like the consistency. It's pretty natural. And underneath that I've used fluval stratum, and that should allow the pH to be kept low and give an ideal environment for the shrimp. All of this circles back around to also providing a great place for the plants to grow and a spot for beneficial bacteria to take root. I guess now is a good time to do another size comparison, because, as you can see, this ghost shrimp is quite a bit larger than a juvenile to medium adult sized cherry shrimp from the Green Jade Shrimp Collection. I've decided to add a new filter to the tank as well, and I don't know how it's going to turn out. Whoa! Well, I guess the added flow of water is making it a little bit of an adventure. There's nothing wrong with these dwarf shrimp experiencing a little bit of current, as long as there's a place for their fry to hide. I guess it's time to introduce another addition that I've made to the new tank. I've added a couple of pink Ramshorn snails, and I guess it's gonna take some time to find out if that was a good idea or not, but in the meantime, they'll do a good job in cleaning the sides of the tank, which up until now have gotten dirtier by the day. Obviously, they don't bother the shrimp at all, and they do eat a large amount of the stuff that's growing on the sides of the tank walls. They can reproduce in environments such as this freshwater tank, but we'll have to see how quickly that happens. Nighttime in this new tank is particularly fun to observe the shrimp during, and they're still active as they are during the day. It's nice to see the plants are growing well. The Utricelia graminifolia isn't dying so much anymore, and the other plants are growing very quickly. I think it's the substrate and the fact that they're able to take a much better hold with their roots. I hadn't often filmed it before now, but I've taken to looking around the tank with a magnifying glass in order to observe the animals that are a little bit more hard to see, including the copepods and the detritus worms. It's also helped me to identify hydras and certain types of algae that are growing on the sides of the tank. Also, a little bit more alarming is the fact that I found this clutch of the snail eggs just a few days after adding them to the tank. The Ramshorn snails don't need anything special to hatch and multiply, so this may be a problem, especially if it keeps up at this pace. I'm going to talk really quickly about the filtration that I've added to this tank, and it might be a bit too much, but either way, it's worked out really well for me. The two sponge filters bring up a lot of the waste and provide great feeding surfaces for the shrimp. I have one Haiger sponge filter and the other one is from Aquarium Co-op. The last filter is a Haiger hang-on back filter, and it was extremely cheap. I don't know if you'll notice this the first time through, but here is an immediate problem of walking backwards while eating and not paying attention to what you're picking up with your maxillipeds. Look, I'm not trying to embarrass her or anything, but you can see very clearly she picks up a poop, one of hers, fiddles with it for a couple seconds, and then decides it is something that is not worth eating. At least she has a right enough mind in order to decide that for herself. This is what these shrimp do best. You can see clearly that she's spread her antennas in a perpendicular path in front of her, and she's using them to scan the entire surface of the substrate and the gravel, looking for bits of food to eat. And she is extremely efficient. She's using all of her maxillipeds to shuffle food bits to the front of her mouth where she can dissect them and then ingest. Whenever I see her like this, I impart some human emotion onto her feeding habits. It almost seems as though she's getting ahead of herself and frantically looking for the next piece to gobble up. And it really does humanize something that has very little human about it. As I've said before, shrimp are nocturnal, so you're most likely to see them and they're most active at night. So I sometimes feed them at night and then use a small amount of light in order to try and film them, and the results are pretty good, I must say. I think there's a saying, something similar to eat like nobody's watching, and these shrimp must take that saying to heart, because they really truly do eat like there's nothing else at stake other than this meal. Unfortunately, when breeding shrimp, it's also important to make sure that there's enough left over for the fry, and you can see why. The adults and the mature shrimp crowd out the younger shrimp and will feed until there is very nearly nothing left. But that's ultimately alright, because there's plenty of food to go around, and unlike some fish, shrimp actually stop eating. They don't overfill themselves. Either way, it's a good idea to provide multiple options for your smaller shrimp, including a substantial amount of biofilm that all the members of the community can eat on, or a type of food like this sinking pellet that will break apart, providing smaller bits for everybody. For right now, I think we've done a really good job breaking in this new tank, and I think I've come up with a name for it that's quite fitting. I think that I'll call this 10-gallon tank, with the hygrophilia bits that are left over from the garden, the forest. There's a good assortment of planted life. The substrate is good, as well as the Carib Sea river sand. It looks like a natural habitat for the shrimp. It's clean, and things seem to be in balance. We'll just have to see how the shrimp take to it over the next couple of weeks. Thank you all for showing up. Please make sure to subscribe and like before you leave, and turn on notifications so that you get the next episode when it drops. And, as always, I hope you have some sweet shrimpy dreams.